In his cabinet meeting on Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced his intention to create a rail project connecting Israel and Saudi Arabia. Whilst normalization talks are, as it stands, only reported, this gave an insight into what the future looks like if the US and Saudi Arabia both get their ways. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh this week for the second time in a few months, as the US is pushing for normalization. But the Saudis are not making it easy. Some of their reported demands to Israel include promises not to annex the West Bank and expand settlements. And to the US, they want a security guarantee if they are attacked and, perhaps most crucially, permission to start a nuclear program. Whilst normalization would benefit Israel economically and in terms of global and regional standing, many in Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition draw a red line at the green line separating Israel and the West Bank and could turn down normalization in favour of West Bank expansion. In return for its own concessions, the US would like Saudi Arabia to roll back on its budding relationship with China and Iran. Is the true motive of the US to create peace in the Middle East or to isolate China? Will Netanyahu have to choose between normalization and his own cabinet? How will potential rapprochement affect the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Will Israel and Saudi Arabia normalize ties?
All right, ladies, gentlemen, let's get to it. Will Israel and Saudi Arabia normalize ties? As always, we begin with our quick fire round, 30 seconds each to let your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick up the conversation from there. So, Dr. Maziad, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
Okay, so normalization would happen eventually down the road, but not right now, not right away, not in the few months to come, or even potentially before November 2024 with the elections, quite honestly. I think the Biden administration will continue to take these steps in order to not be falling behind Trump's attempts earlier, but Saudi Arabia will be reticent because it has interest in bringing about the Palestinian issue.
All right, Mr. Abdul Hussain, your thoughts?
Well, unlike how many think that MBS wouldn't want to give President Biden an easy victory, I think that the Saudis realize that if there's an administration that can impose or can bring peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, it would be this administration. And I think the Saudis have much bigger stake in having the Democrats oversee this than a possible Republican president to come soon.
Last but not least, Mr. Danny Ayalon, your take.
Yeah. Yes, Eli, I would say that if diplomacy was based on mathematical equations and rationality, it would be a no-brainer because it really makes sense for all countries involved, Saudi Arabia, the United States, and Israel. They all can gain a lot from it. It makes so much sense that it will not happen because whatever makes sense in the Middle East does not make sense, unfortunately. So I'm quite skeptical.
Okay, and on that note, ladies, gentlemen, let's feel free to interact from this point onwards to engage in a conversation. And I do want to begin with what is reportedly the main Saudi demand at this point in time, sort of NATO-level defense alliance with the U.S. But you know what they say, that you need to marry someone thinking of how it would be to divorce them. So in this respect, Mr. Abdul Hussain, should the U.S. take the gamble?
Well, I think it's worth it. I agree with Mr. Ayalon that it's really worth it for each one of the parties involved. I'm not sure whether President Biden can get Congress to support an idea of having a NATO-level agreement between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. I think there are many agreements that can get close to this. At least if we outline or specify under what conditions does the United States come to the help and support of Saudi Arabia if the Saudis are ever under aggression. I think we can be creative for this, and it's certainly worth it. At this point, I think the U.S. is doing at least half or two-thirds of what needs to be done. We have assets, we have bases, we have troops in Saudi Arabia. So just formalizing these things and specifying when the U.S. would intervene should not be something that's very hard to arrive at.
Dr. Maziad.
Look, I don't believe at all that this circulating idea that Saudi Arabia even wants a NATO-level alliance of some sort. Saudi Arabia wants freedom of action, just like Israel is. Israel doesn't have a NATO-level alliance. We're just U.S. partners with Israel. And yet the security cooperation, the coordination happens. It doesn't have to be any NATO-like alliance because, frankly, no country actually wants necessarily to be that implicated in any U.S. adventurism that would implicate another country. So I don't think at all that Saudi Arabia actually wants that. It wants that if Israel escalates things with Iran, that it does not take the heat from Iran. But that is a problem between Israel and the United States and Iran. And I think with the Saudi normalization with Iran, that was its own measure of self-defense and kind of measuring things for its own protection Saudi took. So I don't think that this is even one of the items, but there would be security guarantees, security cooperation, also the selling, the delivery of the things that the Saudis bought from us. We have to deliver that to them like any other country. So I don't think that these items that keep circulating in the media, that these are the things that would be in exchange for a normalization. I don't even think they rise to the occasion of a lasting normalization between two important countries like Saudi Arabia and Israel. They are only bilateral issues that the Saudis and the Americans can tackle.
And despite the skepticism, at least again, according to reports, another Saudi demand is the issue of a civil nuclear program. And Ambassador Ayalon, in this respect, perhaps helping, quote unquote, the fight vis-a-vis Iran, but long-term, is a Saudi nuclear program. Is it undermining Israel's national security? Will it trigger a regional arms race?
Well, that's the issue. I don't think Israel is the focus here, but it's the regional security. And the last thing this area needs is a nuclear arms race. And when we talk about this new development, or I would say to make sure it's not a pie in the sky, we have two levels here. First of all, it's Washington, Riyadh. This is the important one. Israel now is in a second, I would say, priority at this point. And here, I think both countries, the United States and Saudi Arabia, are playing with cards that they don't really have. For the United States, of course, they would like it very much. As mentioned here, Biden would like it for before the campaign starts. He needs some foreign policy achievements, and he would be willing to give a lot to the Saudis. The Saudis are demanding very much, but do they really have a choice? Because supposedly, if they don't get it from the United States, whether it's arms, including the civil nuclear reactors, they could go elsewhere, China or Russia. But China or Russia are not substitute to the United States. The military, the Saudi Arabia military, is too much now, is relying on American technology, American equipment, that they cannot go elsewhere. So in a way, they will come to some kind of a modicum of, let's say, of a compromise, and everybody will be winning, and then they will bring Israel to the fore. And here, of course, it's a whole new story with Netanyahu and his extreme government.
Yeah, we'll get to the Netanyahu side of the divide after the break. But until we do, and no matter what happens, whether it's a go, no-go for normalization at this point in time, Mr. Abdul Hussain, can we already declare MBS the biggest winner, the pariah of the past, the messiah of the future?
Well, I don't see him as a loser to see him as a winner. I think he's smartly navigating his foreign policy and his domestic policy. But let me just make something clear about the nuclear issue, because I think the New York Times, Tom Friedman, even got it wrong. This is not an issue of the U.S. giving Saudi Arabia a civilian nuclear program. This is easy to do. We've given one to the UAE, the Baraka reactor. It works with all the safeguards required that the UAE has signed on. And the U.S. is ready to replicate this with Saudi Arabia. This is an easy issue. What's not easy is that the Saudis have demanded that they get enrichment the same way that the Iranians are getting enrichment. The Saudis said, okay, you're giving your enemy Iran a certain concession on milling of uranium and enrichment, and we are your friends and allies, we should at least get the same level. And I think this is the sticking issue in the nuclear issue between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. So once this is resolved, I think the other stuff is really easy, because denominating oil sales, Saudi oil sales in Chinese currency is not happening. The Chinese president begged the Saudis to do this in December. The Saudis didn't grant him the favor. And the reason why the Saudis are not granting him this favor is because they enjoy the safety of the US dollar. They're not willing to shift from the US dollar to China. So at this point, Saudi Arabia is not really sitting in the laps of China, and America is trying to lure it back over to the US side. Saudi Arabia is still on the US side at this point.
Dr. Maziad.
Yeah, so the civilian nuclear issue is, I agree that it has to do with the uranium enrichment on the soil, on the Saudi soil. But while I'm against any proliferation of this, because even besides nuclear weapon level, even the civilian part would be, who knows, an accident like Fukushima or something, even targeted. The future of warfare would be targeting kinds of infrastructure. So what would happen region-wise for all of that? However, this train has left the station. Egypt already has a civilian nuclear facility, and it's cooperating with the Russians. UAE has that, and also so disrespected and whatever. I think Saudi Arabia is heading there, and it's up to us whether in the United States we become part of this or let it find other new partners. So
right. So it's not if and when an arms race begins here in the Middle East. It's already underway. Mr. Danny Ayalon, Ambassador Danny Ayalon, before we take a break, your concluding remarks?
Well, I would say that certainly it is very timely. It is very timely to have a rapprochement between, or let's say an establishment of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, given the threats from Iran, given the threats from ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and all the likes, given the challenges. And we see now with all the climate change, the food security and water availability, this is where we need to cooperate, let alone, of course, another outlet for Saudi oil that could come through Israel's outlet to the Mediterranean and Europe, which would be benefiting everyone.
Yeah. Well, but as someone wise not so long ago said, diplomacy often works against what is reasonable, not according to it. Dear panelists, you're staying with us. We're taking a short break, but when we get back, the Palestinians, how will such a rapprochement affect the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Don't go anywhere, and we'll be back with the summit. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Dr. Marwan Maziad, Hussain Abdul Hussain, and Danny Ayalon. Thank you all so very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, of course, but before we get back to our conversation, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu already buying a ticket to the normalization train. Let's take a quick listen.
In the future, we will be able to bring cargo goods from Eilat to our ports on the Mediterranean. And we'll be able to connect Israel to Saudi Arabia and the Arabian Peninsula. We're working on that as well.
All right, let's get to it. Another quick fire round, 30 seconds each, and we'll pick it up from there. As Tom Friedman puts it, annexation or normalization? What would Benjamin Netanyahu do? What should he do? Dr. Marwan Maziad, please take the lead.
So actually, I foresaw a scenario back in June 2020, so before even the Abraham Accords, where annexation is even increasingly going to be the word of the day from the Israeli side, because Israel is going through a very right-wing and religious tonality to its politics, and I predict that this is going to be here for the next era, like 10 years or so. Yeah. So I would say annexation will come first, and even it might outlast Netanyahu, and that really poses the problem for all these normalization steps.
Mr. Hussain Abdul Hussain, your thoughts?
Well, I think Netanyahu is a politician, and politicians tend to want to stay in power. And this means that he has either to get Mr. Gantz and Lapid into his coalition, and they've already said no. So he will stick with this coalition, and it's not clear how he can move from this to saying yes to normalization with this coalition that he has right now.
Well, the man with the inside scoop, Ambassador Danny Ayalon.
Well, I would say that this announcement of Biden and the visits of American senior level officials like Jake Sullivan and others in Riyadh is just like a like a rainbow in a rainy day for Netanyahu. He's mired here with the political mess that his government has created. So any new hope, changing the agenda, making him again an international leader is a big bonus for him. He will talk a lot about it. Nothing will be done.
Okay. And by the way, as we speak, Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen just told Israel's Channel 12 that Israel is the closest it's ever been to normalization with Saudi Arabia. Well, we shall see. Let's feel free to interact. And Ambassador Ayalon, I do want to begin with you. Is this why U.S. President Joe Biden was so cross with Netanyahu over the judicial overhaul because he was ruining his normalization plans?
Also, what Biden has been very careful to say that he is not really, meddling in Israeli domestic politics. What he said is not you need a reform, not need a reform. When do you need it? How to make it? He doesn't really get to that issue. He just says, the United States need a strong Israel, a united Israel. So not to be really looking into some nefarious forces in the area which could be tempted to destabilize. The United States need a strong Israel. And this is the issue. Iran is the issue. And, of course, normalization is also something which will be a big bonus. But I don't think that he really believes that this is in the cards because, first and foremost, his government today, the current government of Netanyahu, is not going to give him any leeway, not even an inch, to do anything towards normalization. And the Saudis will need something. Yeah. I would say that the Saudis, of course, they have other fish to fry. And their interest now, after many years, supersede the Palestinian interest. But they still have their streets, they still have public opinion polls, so they will need something for the Palestinians, which Netanyahu at this point cannot give them, unless the government composition is changed. But this is something that I don't see right now.
So, Dr. Maziad, to that point, exactly, the Palestinians, good news, bad news for them if rapprochement is gaining traction?
So I don't think so back to Egypt peace treaty with Israel, that was a lasting peace treaty because it was based on interests, security for the exchange of the land, the undoing of the wartime, and that lasted for that long because it was mutually beneficial. And the Palestinian case was relegated until the rest of the Arab countries come on board, actually. So now with the UAE coming on board in the name of even holding the annexation, remember that descriptor back at the time? Well, the annexation somehow was held, but not indefinitely. Now these characters in Netanyahu's government are actually civilianizing the entire West Bank by having civilian leadership in lieu even of the IDF. And there are measures, even de jure, not just de facto. So now you cannot expect that Saudi Arabia will come in that sequence like that without having anything major for the Palestinian, because apparently also, and I spoke to some Egyptian diplomat and other Jordanian diplomats about that, their sense is like, the assumption here is as if there will be no resistance whatsoever from the Palestinians, as if this kind of annexation and normalization will go hand in hand somehow or in a sequence. But apparently the Palestinians will not take that laying down, and by reaction to that, neither will the Egyptian or the Jordanian or the Saudi for that matter.
Yeah, and speaking on, I wouldn't say ulterior motives, but perhaps the end goal gains here, Mr. Hussain Abdul Hussain, China. How big of an issue is that for the U.S. When it is talking or seeking normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia?
Well, I don't think China will try to obstruct any of these. I mean, so many times Palestinians and many Arabs make the mistake that if the U.S. steps back and we see the rise of Russia and China, then Israel will weaken and the Arabs will be in a better position. I disagree with this. I think the Israeli ties with China and Russia are strong enough, and even if they become the superpowers of the world, I don't think this will change anything for the Palestinians. And by the same token, I don't think normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel will affect anything connected to the Palestinians. Look at Abraham Accords. The Palestinians said this will throw us under the bus. If you go back 3 years before 2020 and then 3 years after 2020, before and after the Abraham Accords, nothing has changed for the Palestinians. So the Palestinian issue starts and ends with the Palestinians. And this imagined Arab Street and Arab solidarity, I think the last time Arab solidarity worked was in 1973 with the Saudi oil boycott. But otherwise, since then, I don't see any connection. I think all of this connection has been just hyped in the media, but there's nothing real behind it.
Dr. Maziad, I can see that you're not in full agreement here.
Yeah, the thing is, because there has been a change on the ground for the Palestinians in the West Bank, meaning that the characters in the Smotrich and Ben Gvir, when they assume civilian positions in the West Bank as if this is part of Israel proper, that's kind of de jure, not just de facto annexation. So the question becomes, what are you going to do about the Palestinians there? In fact, one scenario from my strategic foresight was about almost having Palestine exclusively in Gaza. That is the Palestine. That's it's a coastal city that goes back to the Palestine. But then that's as if you're really, literally saying there is no Palestinian state whatsoever in the West Bank. This will be annexed, and the people who live there, whether there will be just permanent residents or such. But that has implication on the ground. If the Arab world and the Muslim world and the world accepts that, then maybe I don't think even. I'm told that there would be resistance even to that from the Palestinians. So I don't see how that can just go laying down.
Well, Ambassador Danny Ayalon, before we have to wrap it up, will peace in the Middle East bring peace to Netanyahu's coalition opposition battles?
Good question. Let me just remind everyone, Eli, that for the Abraham Accord, actually Netanyahu had a chance to annex 30% of the West Bank, according to Trump's vision for two states.
Right.
It included an annexation of 30%, but he didn't do it in order to gain the Abraham Accords, because this was a stipulation by the Emirates. So right now also he would prefer normalization with Saudi Arabia and give up annexation. But I'm afraid this is not in the cards at this point, because he has a very, very, let's say, unyielding government.
Hey, I see you liked it. Want more? Just hit the subscribe button right here. Go on. I know you want to.